Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. And it's wonderful to have you all join us today as we explore a relatively new aspect of AI that affects all of us. It's about why your best AI strategy is actually about relationships. As AI shapes the workplace, some organizations are discovering that their greatest competitive advantage isn't just technical, it's relational. In a time when more than 90% of companies are increasing their investment in AI, the real differentiator can lie in how well humans and AI collaborate. Today's speaker, Kimberly Evans, will explore why your best AI strategy depends not on the algorithms alone, but on the quality of your workforce relationships in collaboration with AI. The session is going to examine how relational excellence drives strategic productivity, innovation, and resilience. And with AI amplifying both strengths and dysfunctions, leaders must rethink how they lead and build symbiotic, trust-based environments. The conversation's especially timely as business navigates hybrid work, generational shifts, and the ethical demands of AI oversight. To dive into this topic and lead the discussion, we're joined today by Kimberly Evans, the CEO of Relations Research and a collaborator with Emory Executive Education. Kimberly is passionate about helping customers be more successful in the execution of their strategies, and she has extensive experience advising clients across diverse industry sectors and leading client implementation teams around business relationship design and stewardship, change leadership, organization design and development, and cultural transformations, to name a few. Today, Kimberly's going to explore the topic that I just talked about. She'll spend about 35 minutes exploring that, sharing her research-based insights. And then please, as usual, for those that have been on Business Over Breakfast before, please put your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to as many of those as possible. And please remember, if you or a colleague of yours are seeking to build your skills in AI or in any other business and leadership area, please check out our upcoming courses. And we're going to post those in the post the full calendar in the chat. I'm currently taking Professor Ryan's online Culture of Experimentation course and finding out all the things I should be doing that I've forgotten since my MBA days, which were quite a few days ago. So I encourage you to check out the calendar, check out the courses that we have on offer. One that is coming up that I do want to point out to you, if you've been thinking about exploring or honing executive coaching, the registration for our upcoming October in-person program is just a few days away on August 25th. The course starts in October, but the registration is in a few days' time. And I've done that course and it is phenomenal. So please take some time and check that out. Kimberly, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm intrigued by what you have to share in terms of your research.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for attending. I'm excited to be here. Let me pull up my slides. Okay, so really thrilled to share with you some of our lessons learned from decades of helping organizations transform and optimize relationships, not just in the workforce, but across their entire business ecosystems, so as to reap more value. And I'm particularly excited to make a case today, hopefully, that why this topic and why this is so important to this era we're living in, this AI era. So to begin, I want to ask a question. How many of you have seen failures of AI implementations in your own organizations? Now, the failure rate is debatable, but I looked at a number of sources, and the most typical statistic that is reported is somewhere between 70 to 85% of AI initiatives fail. Now, when you're dealing with new technologies, new initiatives, failure can be a wonderful teacher, right? But the problem is that some of these failures are coming at an enormous cost, a human cost, a financial cost, and are incredibly risky. And uh, frankly, many of these failures are self inflicted. And so we're going to be talking more about that. But just because we're talking about AI and it's so new, I guess it's been around for a long time, but still there's this idea that it's new and fresh and exciting. I want to just remind everyone that solid change leadership principles still apply. And that means before you start anything, really being clear about how does this help us with our business strategy? How does it help us achieve our strategic objectives? If you're not clear there, you don't know what success looks like. You can't even articulate the why. Um, that seems like such common sense, but we see people skipping over this step. We always, in any engagement that we're part of, take the time to understand what is the current state, and particularly where do you have vulnerabilities in your stakeholder relationships, because that really helps your roadmap ahead if you know where the vulnerabilities and the risks are, as well as what you can leverage in your change strategy. And then, of course, understanding your objectives and how you're going to measure success, forming a positionally diverse guiding coalition to lead the change, and not trying to swallow the elephant in one bite. We've got to approach change through incremental wins. We've got to be very responsible and try to minimize risk and disruption when we approach change. So just a quick reminder that these principles have been around for a long time. We've used them in digital transformations, cultural transformations, process improvements, and they still apply even when we're talking about AI. So today, what I want to talk about is how AI, smart integration of AI within human communities at work, can help organizations become more anti-fragile. There are a lot of people out there that think that the most important thing that leaders are faced with is how to adopt AI to achieve massive efficiencies. We come at this with a slightly different perspective, or maybe you could call it a big perspective difference, because we think the biggest leadership challenge today is how to thrive in uncertainty, how to survive the next black swan event, and how to adapt quickly to fast changing market conditions and new competitors and be able to innovate. And so when we think about AI and the AI revolution, it's far more than just a technology revolution. We now have a technology that can participate in with humans differently, that can be part of the collaborative thinking processes that define modern work. It's very, very exciting. And it's also fraught with a lot of relational risk, which we'll be talking more about. Okay, so before we talk about how do we have better relationships with AI, I want to talk about current state challenges. And I want to recognize something, that organizations just were not designed for today's reality. Reality is that change is constant, everything's in motion, nothing is certain. And if you think about that for a minute and compare that to many of our corporate practices, it's just out of sync. And you see today that there's still 5-year strategic planning. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with strategic plans. But what I'm pointing out here is that it's so much more important, perhaps, to be able to develop strategic scenarios than rigid plans. to look at what could go very, very wrong in the near term, midterm, long term, or what could go incredibly right. And how do we plan for that? How do we respond to these different scenarios? That makes us more adaptable when we can do good strategic scenario planning. And I mean, my goodness, annual performance reviews or even twice a year performance reviews, how does that make sense in the world that we're living in? And so I think if you accept that change is constant, that nothing is certain, it can bring about a different level of humility and questioning of how we do things, how we operate in the workplace today. I have an example that when I was putting these slides together stuck in my mind, and it was a conversation that I had a couple months ago, a casual conversation I had with a chief people officer. And she was describing that they had hired a consultant to come in and look at how they could do things differently to be more appealing to the younger generation and have people be more engaged at work and stay with the organization and grow with the organization. Anyway, one of the primary recommendations that the consultant came back with was to develop extremely detailed career paths so that anyone, say in a junior position, would know exactly what jobs they had to take on in order to reach the more senior positions in the company. And she was talking about how much work this was going to be for them to implement. Well, they weren't a client and she didn't ask for my advice, but this conversation just kept clawing at me. So I sent her an email and said, look, here's my unsolicited opinion. I don't think you should do this. I think that you can't promise this, and there's a lot of risk in setting that expectation. And maybe by the time you get all this work implemented, all your roles will change. I went on to suggest that maybe a better investment of time would be to help the workforce understand better how the world of static jobs has gone by the wayside, that work is dynamic and roles are dynamic. Um, anyway, she wrote back and thanked me for my opinion, and I don't really know what happened next. But that just illustrates how now more than ever, we've got to accept that nothing is certain and really take a look at our organizational practices and question, is this really where our attention should be? So, I know maybe there could be some argument around this, but our perspective is there is a whole lot of reckless and risky AI adoption happening. Not only just, as I mentioned earlier, not taking the time to clearly define what are our strategic goals and how does this help us, but ignoring very real human relational dynamics, even though you can't see relational dynamics, they're invisible to some extent. They're very powerful. They're very powerful. The dynamics playing out in your hierarchies and in your networks between departments and even out with in your supply chain and with customers are very real and very powerful. And you ignore them at your own peril. And if there are vulnerabilities there, um, that raises your AI adoption risk. We already talked about how important it is to apply good change practices and not try to just manage change, but to lead change. Redesign of work is huge, is absolutely huge. When we look at our work streams, when we look at our design of work roles, we've got to be so thoughtful about what capabilities are best suited for human beings and what capabilities are best suited for AI. In most cases, we're not talking necessarily about throwing out roles or fully replacing roles, but augmenting roles where roles are played by the combination of AI and human capabilities. We've got to be so thoughtful about what we delegate to AI. The incorporation of AI into our processes, into our teams, can bring about emergent behaviors. AI is not a static tool, it's adaptive. And I just can't stress enough how important good, thoughtful design is to AI implementation. And when you're in a rush to get some fast productivity gains, often these are the factors that get overlooked. And then, as I mentioned before, we should look beyond automation and consider what's going to make us more organizationally fit and resilient. An example stands in my mind of a large insurance company that decided to create a customer service AI agent. And instead of putting that agent out on the front as the frontline interface with customers, instead, it integrated it thoughtfully into the customer service teams so that those human agents could tap into and work with that bot, and that bot became a very useful coworker that helped them answer questions better, help them problem solve customer issues better. But what it did is it maintained that high touch interface with the customer. And I'm sure many of you, I mean, this is a question, how many of you have been stuck in that awful customer service bot loop that you just can't get out of? It reminds me of when, years ago you get stuck in the customer service phone tree and you couldn't get out no matter how many times you pressed one for a human being. And these things have cost. I recently was overseas and had a terrible experience with a rental car customer service bot where no matter how many times I typed, please connect with a human, I couldn't get out of it. There was no way out. And I don't think I'll be using that particular rental car company ever again. So another backdrop, context matters when you're thinking about AI implementation, and we can't ignore what's happened in these wild swings in the employment marketplace. Because every time there is a wild swing, it changes how leaders view and invest in people. And how many years ago was it that we were talking about the Great Resignation? Everybody was talking about the Great Resignation. I guess it was in 2021. And now, if you open up the Wall Street Journal, there's all kinds of headlines that, the organizations have taken back control. Well, all these pendulum swings have an effect. And one of the effects is that it feeds fear. It feeds zero-sum thinking and creates, highly transactional dynamics within the relationships that you have with your workforce. And, why does this matter? Well, if you want people to come along with you, if you want people to be enthusiastic stakeholders in your business and adopt AI responsibly, and you've got a highly transactional relationship or maybe even toxic relationship dynamics playing out, you've really got to think about what could go wrong. What could go wrong when people are fearful, disengaged, confused, and disempowered? So hopefully this is making sense with connecting the dots between these dynamics and thinking about your AI implementations. So I guess another thing that I want to point out that comes into play is the outdated labor paradigm. I know we don't talk about things the same way we did during the industrial age, but based on my experience, the labor paradigm is alive and well. And it's alive and well, not just in hourly workforces. To, to a large degree, in many cases, people are seen as labor and expense to be minimized, as disposable, as interchangeable, despite how many times you hear leaders of organizations say people are our most important asset. By the way, they're not an asset, they can't be owned, but that's neither here nor there.
Kimberly, I've got a question for you that's around talent. I think pertinent to where you're going here. And Stephen asks, what are the risks associated with using AI to screen and match people to roles in an organization? And how are organizations hiring for future positioning of the firm versus those who have been successful in the past with that old operating model of labor and business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's well documented that there's all kinds of problems with using AI for selection of, of candidates. And one of those problems is that AI exhibits bias. And so, my caution there is, and we'll be talking a little bit about this, is that, AI is not superhuman. It mirrors the problems that we see in human beings. So we know that hiring is fraught with problems that when we interviewing, for instance, is a horrible predictor. And because we as human beings are biased and we tend to prefer people who are like us in hiring. And so large language models were built by human beings. They exhibit the worst of human thinking shortcuts. And so I'm not saying those biases can't be overcome, but it's a risky proposition. And if you're going to use AI to screen candidates, be very thoughtful in the role that it plays. Be thoughtful about making sure it doesn't have bias. Be thoughtful about not removing human judgment or things like validated hiring assessments. And then, look, this is not specific to AI, but here's another issue that I'll bring up. Most selection processes are incredibly flawed anyway because they don't start with good role design. So how do you hire predictably and avoid false positives and false negatives if you don't start with really good role design? I forgot the part B of that question, but
I think that's fine. I want to have coffee with you and find out about good role
oh, okay,
design.
okay. Maybe I'll be hitting on some more aspects of B, but
Thanks, thanks,
okay.
Kimberly.
So yeah, I mean that's a whole topic, right? That we could do a whole session just on that, Nicola. Um, so anyway, here's the thing about the labor paradigm. It is out of sync with modern work realities. If you have work roles that require creativity and imagination and judgment, and you expect innovation and good problem solving, then that doesn't square. That doesn't square with the labor paradigm, because you can't command human enthusiasm. You can't command peak performance, right? People choose how they show up. And so what we have to recognize here is that if we expect more from people, that we we have to recognize that people too expect more. Nicola mentioned in the opening and the introduction about generational changes, and we can't ignore how worker expectations are shifting and continue to evolve. And look how much they evolved during just a few years ago during COVID and the work from home challenges. So, there we've got to be so thoughtful about how we have relational dynamics where people are invested in showing up and bringing their full selves to the workplace. If we if if we adopt AI in a way that diminishes human thinking and human agency, we might just erode the very things, the very capabilities that are going to help us thrive and help us have competitive advantages in the future. And every time I see a headline where that's very fear based about how CEOs are talking to their um, workforces, I just want to. It's just like, oh, it's 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 not good. So I guess now we're going to switch gears a little bit to talking about what do we do about this? And it's a big topic, but I'll bring up a few things. I'll share a few of our learnings on how we can have better relationships with AI in our organizations. And the first piece of counterintuitive advice is make sure that the quality of relationships you have with humans is good. If that is weak, you can expect adoption resistance. You can expect compliance with minimal effort and thought. You can expect that you're going to have risky or unsanctioned use. Or maybe people will adopt AI and hide the gains. And so their usage would be directed to personal gains only. I mean, you can have all kinds of really good guardrails and governance set up, but you can't control human behavior and what people do. And so you might not even get compliance. And I mentioned talent here, but really what I'm talking about applies to all kinds of contexts of relationships in your broader ecosystem. So my point here is that if you want to reap optimal gains from relationships with AI, make sure you have really good human relationships in place. Pay attention to that. This is not the time to pay less attention. This is the point I'm making, is that I see less attention to human dynamics in a time where we should be paying more attention. Forgive me if I sound like I'm on my soapbox here. I'm pretty passionate about this. Okay, so I'm making the argument that it's time that we move away from the labor paradigm. So I can't make that statement without saying, well, what's in its place? So we coined a term called strategic productivity, because not all value that's produced by roles can be measured easily by generic productivity measures. And I'm talking about things like breakthrough ideas or delighting customers or leading people, right? It's those don't really fit neatly into the way we think about generic productivity. And so there is a certain kind of relationship dynamic that needs to be cultivated in order to realize strategic productivity, strategic value from relationships. And that is one that has mutual value and mutual accountability. It's not one sided, it's symbiotic. That if you have relationships where the business is gaining at the expense of people to too much of a degree, or you have a culture of extreme workforce entitlement where people are gaining at the expense of the business. That's not a winning formula. And so cultivating relationships where there's a healthy distribution of power, there's mutual accountability, there's mutual value, is we've been studying this for decades, and this is the best thing we've come up with that gives rise to better value, better strategic value. And the thing that's exciting is that AI can bolster humans' ability to generate strategic productivity. But that only happens if people have a sense of purpose, people feel valued, they feel heard, they have empowerment and agency, and they are acting as enthusiastic stakeholders in the business.
Kimberly, a question came up. How do you actually know if the relationships you have in your workplace are healthy?
That's a great question, and one that troubled us for a long time, because you can't tell from employee engagement surveys and things like that, and you have to develop. We this is not a commercial, but we ended up developing a system for measuring bilateral quality of relationship. QR is the vital sign, which stands for quality of relationship, because there wasn't an existing way to measure this. But it's so much more than just having a way to measure it. Part of it is just listening. It's listening and paying attention. And look, I think that leaders they know when their relationship. Someone said to me the other day, they were talking about their biggest customer, and they said they don't see us as a strategic partner. They know it's transactional, right? So sometimes you just know that your relationships with your suppliers are transactional, with your customers. But what that's probably more obvious. But I think what leaders don't pay enough attention to is, our relationships transactional in the workplace? Because you can't just look at turnover either, right? People there's a lot of people right now that are not moving around as much as they used to, but that doesn't mean they haven't quit and stayed, right? So that's a great question, and there's not a fast answer to it. Requires a lot of
I
thought.
think that's another long conversation.
Each one of these questions is a whole session.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this is just a framework that we developed to help leaders think about, what do we mean by this we dynamic, this mutual dynamic. And this particular framework is in the context of the employment relationship. So we know that from every role, we want to get the absolute maximum or optimal, I should say, outcomes with the least resource demands, right? That's what's making leaders so inebriated and excited about weaving AI in, is that the outcomes can be great, hypothetically, with far less resources, right? Maybe we need one software developer instead of 10 software developers. So, but we've got to do that with minimizing risk. So it's been true forever that from every role, the organization is generally motivated to maximize outcomes, reduce risk, and reduce resource demands, or conserve resource demands, right? There's an opportunity for AI to make this equation even more attractive. The argument here that I'm making, though, is it's not going to happen very well or without a lot of risk if there isn't something in it. What's in it for the person? What's in it for the human being? If their side of the equation is a miserable work experience, if their role doesn't fit in well into their life, if the team they're on is toxic, If their side of the equation, if this is lopsided, it's going to spell trouble. And here's what, so much of our research over the years has been around, is looking at how when you can get this we dynamic right, you do get more innovation. It's powerful. You can turn markets around when you just by changing the um, relationship dynamic. But I'm not saying it's easy. It takes a lot of intentionality and determination. Okay, I may be running a little long here, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. I'm going to talk just a minute about, there's all kinds of contexts of AI and agentic and generative AI tools, but I want to talk a little bit about using AI as an individual and how you as an individual can have better relationships with AI. The first one, and I've hit on it a bit, is to appreciate the limitations of AI. And part of that is recognizing, as I've said, that AI mirrors human limitations. It can amplify and reinforce our worst thinking shortcuts. It also, human beings have vanishing points, meaning each one of us can only see and perceive reality, a fraction of reality. Not to get too nerdy here, but all creatures, not just humans, have what's called an umwelt. And that just means that creatures, experience reality and perceive reality differently. But AI also has vanishing points. There's ways of helping move beyond those vanishing points if you use AI correctly. But again, the worst thing you can do is think that AI is some kind of superhuman sage. There's terabytes of knowledge, but it's up to you to extract that in meaningful ways. It's important to recognize that just like human team members who are yes men and yes women, AI their generative AI tools are designed to be very agreeable. They will convince you your half-baked idea is brilliant. You've got to tell it not to be a sycophant, and to challenge your thinking. Again, I've already talked about this a lot. Avoid over delegation. Be smart about delegating too much to AI and removing human judgment from the equation. And you reap what you sow, right? So AI is not the way that for you to think less, become more lazy. We're arguing that AI requires even more attention, even more vigilance. You've got to be a good teacher, an astute inquirer, and you've really got to vet what information you take in, and how you use it. Okay, so if you're an executive in the audience, I want to talk about what capabilities that may be missing or weak in your organization that need to be cultivated in order for your humans to have good relationships with AI, and also for your organization just to thrive in this uncertain world. And so the first one is intellectual humility. I can't emphasize enough how dangerous certainty and hubris is today. And the other thing is curiosity, being curious, continuously curating knowledge, paying attention. And think about the fact that what you know in your organization, your collective knowledge in your organization, is less important perhaps than what your organization can continue to learn and discover. And then imagination. It is very difficult to become a good decision maker within the context of uncertainty if people aren't learning how to imagine and stress test scenarios. Now, I was worried that this slide could be interpreted as just a throwaway. Um, yeah, that this makes sense. But just think for a minute how these capabilities uh, go against prevailing norms, prevailing organizational norms. So leaders get promoted because of their certainty, their confidence, and people that are too curious are often seen as troublemakers. They they get terminated because they're difficult, they're challenging how we do things around here. And a question that I'll throw out is, when is the last time you've been in a meeting where what was brought to leadership was all the things that could go wrong? It just, it's just dangerous. That's not the norm. It's not safe for people to talk about uh, failure too much, at least not in a lot of the corporate environments that I've seen. And so you can do all the tools training, AI tools training in the world that you want, but if you're not building these capabilities, I think I think it's really putting the organization at risk. Okay, so this is my last slide, and I'll end on the fact that I think that there's such a big opportunity. Um, there's such an opportunity for to get this right. Even though there's so many unknowns, no one knows how the world with AI is going to unfold. But based on what we've seen, there's enormous opportunity to reap far more collective, I'll call it collective intelligence, through strategically productive AI and human relationships. And I think the organizations that figure this out are going to be the winners in the years to come, while their peers are still treating AI like some kind of technology automation. And I think this is a moment for great soberness, because no matter how successful your organization is, success is not guaranteed. And some colleagues of mine were talking about the Good to Great book that is often still brought up today, where the 11 um, companies were profiled as great and what made them great. And to remember that that was published in 2001. Okay, so I'd argue only one of those organizations could still meet the criteria of greatness. Circuit City has gone bankrupt. Walgreens is struggling mightily. Fannie Mae had to be bailed out by the government. And and so um, you know, with AI, we just have such an opportunity to go forward wisely, or to go forward making very short-sighted decisions and put our organization's long-term viability at risk. And so that's all I had to share.
That's a lot, Kimberly, and we've got lots of questions. So let me see if I can do a good job of asking them.
You want me to
Hannah
stop sharing?
asks
Should I
in
stop sharing now?
yeah, if you,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. All right. Great. All right.
Um, Hannah asks, what about ensuring that the AI can make the proper connections when information is hidden in silos? Do you have any thoughts in terms of how do we leverage AI, or can we leverage AI? What's the challenges of that when we're still siloed as an organization?
Yeah. I mean, without getting, you know, this question, I think, gets into technical, there's technical matters, right? That have, in terms of how, information architecture, and, how we manage information, how we make information accessible. But there's also, I would say, the danger of what happens when you do let AI access information between departments, including emails, including confidential customer information, and then and you're using agentic AI to make decisions, maybe negotiate on your behalf, and or this is where it's so important. There are just so many things that could go wrong, and we probably all read about some of those things. Like, you can go to Anthropic's research page and read about the AI bot that was threatened to be shut down and found an incriminating email and tried to blackmail the engineer. So it's that is a very complex question that I think is hard to answer quickly.
Okay, all right, for another time. David asks, he said, the organizations that were not designed for today's reality slide that you had, along with the outdated labor paradigms, really stood out to me. After 40 plus years in corporate America, I've seen versions of this message for decades, always framed around unprecedented change. Yet the core issues seem frozen. Do you think AI might finally help companies move beyond just reacting to change and actually redesign how they operate?
We hope so. We really hope so. I don't know. I really don't know.
Mm,
I think that what is becoming increasingly clear is that stasis is risky. Just doing nothing
mm,
is is not um, is not a good answer. I don't know. In fact, this is a question where we just started a research effort to talk to CEOs to try to get a more broad read on that, right? We work with CEOs that tend to, there's a certain type of CEO that engages with us, and they do get that. But to answer that question, I really don't know about the broader um, population of leaders out there, and how much this is going to cause them to rethink that. I
right.
would say the headlines suggest not.
Mhm. Marsha asks, is there any preferred communication style or method to better collaborate with AI?
Yes. Uh, you so just like when you're onboarding a new team member, you've got to be very explicit, perhaps more explicit about expectations than you could ever than you think you need to, right? I think sometimes people forget you've got to give the context to AI. It's not a mind reader. You've got to give the context, and you also I don't know about the style of communication so much as being very curious and very skeptical, and asking it to be polymathic in its thinking, so that it's not giving you just answers that are overly simplistic, or yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
it's not even just about designing good prompts. If you're not curious, if you're not a good inquirer, if you're not asking it to stress test your thinking, or even asking you to take on lots of different personas with lots of different thinking styles, you can ask AI to adopt many different thinking styles, and that will help you say if you're developing a presentation for sales, it will
Right.
help you think about that.
Interesting. Thor asks, do you know of any companies that you believe are doing a good job of applying generative AI? And are you able to give any examples?
Well, the example I gave of the insurance company, I believe, was USAA. I recently, they're not a client of ours, but I recently sat in on a presentation that sounded like Moderna was being very thoughtful. Based on what I've read, Microsoft seems to be, approaching AI with a lot of thought. Um, but I think it remains to be seen. I'll answer
Mhm.
it that way.
Yeah, the jury is still out. And as you said earlier, the technology is changing and adapting, and so there's so much happening. This is an emergent technology. It is certainly not fully baked. Um, Adrian asks, how can you relate to leaders who don't want to adopt AI at all?
I personally can't relate to them at all. I I I don't I don't even know how to answer that question because uh, I just think that the world is changing and organizations have to change with
With them?
with them. And I guess how I tend to be pretty blunt, how I would relate to that kind of leader is to try to expose the risk of doing nothing.
That's a great point. Stephen asked about your perspective on how agentic AI might affect the future of work, and especially teams, as agentic AI acts as agents to gather information, make deductions, decisions. So how are you thinking about agentic AI as being um, sort of part of the team or part of how your future work is being organized?
Hugely. I mean, agentic AI is going to have a huge impact. It's going to have a huge impact on um, how we think about software architecture, how we design and organize software teams. So that you may have agentic AI, for instance, uh, doing all the software documentation. It's playing different roles, and it's more than that. It's taking over multi-stage processes, and so when I think about it, it's really exciting, but it's also sobering because I think it raises a lot of design questions about um, oversight, human oversight, and how much autonomy you give agentic uh, AI. And so, again, huge topic.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about it, say in a sales organization, it can adapt and learn from different people on that sales team, and um, it can be, it changes the team. It changes the
Mm-hmm.
team dynamic in ways that we can't possibly anticipate, but we can be very, very thoughtful about designing as best we can and being vigilant in how what we're learning and then adapting as we go.
I think we've got time for one last question. This may be too big, but as we think about redesigning the organization and how work gets performed, as we start to incorporate AI into our teams and work practices, who's in the room or who should be in the room in that organization and role redesign work? Is it just HR? Is it their responsibility? Is it HR and IT? Who would you recommend to be in the room?
Okay. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, the strategy, this strategy, it has to be at the highest levels, the board and the CEO. When it comes to the redesign of work, um, I don't think it can be just HR. I think we need positional diversity. We need to use good, empowered guiding coalitions where you bring very much needed perspectives from people that know the work they're citizens in those teams, right? And you need HR experts, you need a variety of people that can think about the different vantages of this. And at least that's how we approach it.
Thank you. You have raised so much today. We're going to have multiple coffees thinking about how do we help everybody explore this and really come up to speed with some of these issues more. So I'm going to hand over now to Pam. So thanks, Kimberly. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, I am going to share my screen here and get us going. So Kimberly, thank you again. I mean, we are hearing so much about different roles inside of organizations and the fear that's coming as AI is playing a larger and larger role inside of organizations. And I think it's such a great opportunity to focus on more of the positive aspects and how we can, to use your language, how we can actually treat it more like a member of the team, if you will, and do that way. All right, so let me get shared here. Let's see. Go. All right. So looking ahead with Business Over Breakfast, we are excited to welcome back to Business Over Breakfast, Natasha Ganem. And she's going to talk about how to transform good teams into high-performing powerhouses. She'll be leveraging organizational psychology with evidence-based tools to help you increase the effectiveness of all members of your team. And then on September the 18th, Jackson Kirchis will join us to talk about the science of happiness at work, tools and strategies, even in the midst of uncertainty. There's emerging research that's been going on literally just in the past couple of years in the areas of social science and the science of positive psychology. So you won't want to miss that. I think many of us are searching for ways to find both resilience and coping mechanisms as we deal with the uncertainties in the environment we're in, both at work and in our just political environment. And as Nicola mentioned at the top of the webinar, we do have some upcoming programs. She focused in on our coaching program. I can tell you, if you are looking to elevate your own personal coaching skills, I had the privilege of participating in the first half of our coaching diploma program, the Foundations course. And it truly was phenomenal. The in-person session gives you the opportunity to mix and mingle, or if you're more of an online virtual person, that works well. Same content, great engagement, lots of applied work. Coming up soon is Negotiation Strategy for Success. And in that session, you will have the opportunity to learn about your own natural styles and then how to adapt your style. Now, this applies whether you are negotiating big contracts at work, negotiating for a promotion or salary, or even negotiating with your kids. There's always ways in our work and life that negotiations come into play. And then always a popular course is Executive Communication and Leadership Presence. It helps us understand the ways to communicate better up, down, and across, and how our presence plays an important role, how trust plays an important role in those communications. Here at Emory, we are just coming back to school. I know some of the kiddos are already back to school. We thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you again, Kimberly, for sharing your research and insights around the relationship aspect of AI in the workforce today. We look forward to seeing you on our next Business Over Breakfast and have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.